Probably the most important feature of the examination is the selection of examiners. This is absolutely critical and one of the most significant factors in the success of your examination. They must be leaders in their field, they must be qualified, so they hold a degree at least at the level at which they are examining, or they are a professor. You can't have UWS staff or past supervisors. We advise only one inexperienced examiner. The research evidence shows that inexperienced people just tend to be a little bit harsh sometimes. And of course we want to encourage them, new early career researchers, to be examiners, as you will be yourself shortly, but it's judicious for an examination to have only one. You need also to identify a conflict of interest. Sometimes this can be managed provided it's identified and dealt with. Other critical things to ask are, is the examiner aligned with your work? Have you cited them? Does the abstract tell them what they need to know? There's more information about the abstract in our little examinations handbook, and I'm just looking around because I had one here to show you. Our next edition may look a little bit different, but you can get these from me in the Office of Research Services, and we have them online as well. What say do you have in the selection of examiners? Well, quite a lot actually, and you probably should have been talking about examiners since the commencement of your candidature. You can say to your supervisor who you would like to have as an examiner and who you would not like to have. You might, for example, put forward a panel of about, 6 or 8, there may be not that many people available, and then your supervisor makes the final decision about who will be appointed, and that information is not given to you at the time of examination, though you may request it later on. It's a very good idea to listen to the advice of your examiner if you've selected someone that you think is terrific and they suggest that perhaps that's not a great selection, because they'll have insider information of how that person performs as an examiner. Perhaps they're a little bit pernickety, perhaps they're a bit of a boundary rider, which is not good for you if you're doing cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary work. Perhaps they have a known habit of being a little bit slow with examination. And how many examiners to have? 3 altogether, 2 to whom your work will be sent immediately and 1 in reserve. So very important that that reserve is also the best person for the job. In recent years at UWS and many other universities around Australia, we reduced the number of examiners for doctorates from 3 to 2, precisely because it was difficult to get 3 people at the start who were the best ones for the job, and so supervisors were selecting people who may not have been the best examiner just for the sake of having 3. Does no one any favours. Format of the thesis. We have a few rules based principally on not irritating examiners, and for that reason we say no spiral binding. It's extremely annoying when it falls apart. You can use heat tape or perfect binding. The printer and the binder will know all about that. You can have it hardbound if you like. Some people are of the opinion that the examiner is less likely to flourish the red pen if it's hardbound, but I don't know that there's any evidence for that, and I wouldn't trust that as being correct. But that's up to you to make the selection. Part of the thing to think about too now is that the library copy is electronic, so you don't have to make a hardbound copy, but think about it, at the end of your candidature is probably the one opportunity when you will make copies of your thesis, and you might like one for home, for the office, for your mum, to give one to your supervisor, and that's the time to be doing that. The written component. 3 copies, as we said before, a statement of authentication. There's examples of this on the web and also in the little examination handbook. It must be on A4 paper, opaque enough for it not to be seen through, and single-sided. There's no word length, but 100,000 words is considered the absolute limit for a doctorate, and 80,000 words for a research master's. No doorstops. They're not favoured by examiners, I can tell you. Editing is permissible under the guidelines that were negotiated between the Deans of Graduate Study Australia and the professional editing body. We have advice for that on the website. There is a very specific role for the editor, And you can use candidature project funds to support this if you have any left. Things to know: some people erroneously believe that they can't cite their own publications. It's a sort of self-plagiarism, but it's not. Of course, you should mention your publications as a sign of success, and it gives the examiner confidence, actually, that the work has already had some peer review. Confidential material: if you have something that you're worried about a patent with, you can talk to us about having the examiner sign a confidentiality agreement. Where to send the thesis? To the Registrar's Office, to the Examinations Officer in Building K at Kingswood, but you should just check that information on the web. We also ask that you send one copy to the leader of the AOU, and I say AOU as Academic Organisational Unit, the generic term. At the moment that's within the college, but from 2012 that probably will be within the school. That's just a final check-up to just look at the presentation of the thesis. It's not saying that the thesis is ready to work for examination or that it's at a particular academic standard, but it's saying that it's presentable to be sent out. You'd be amazed how many times the smallest things get missed. And I remember one of them on the statement of authentication. You open up the thesis and instead of "I hereby," it says "I hereby," which just starts off on the wrong foot. I must mention too that when you get the work back from the binder and the printer, just check that it's all there. Occasionally a chapter gets missed or put in the wrong place, so allow yourself a bit of time there and allow yourself plenty of time to deal with those sort of running around at the last minute with getting printing done. It's nothing worse than having to do it at the last second and be rushing around, tearing around in the traffic and trying to get into the registrar's office by the end of census date or something like that. Production costs. Sometimes there's specialist production costs with your thesis, with some software or some printing that you have done. If you're on a scholarship, you may be eligible to claim through that means. Otherwise, try your candidature project funds. Conjoint reports are where the examiners confer and put in a together report. This is not encouraged at UWS, and very rarely has it been requested. If it was requested by an examiner, UWS would speak to the supervisor and confer with them, work out what would be the best thing to do. Unlikely to happen. How much time do you have, and what about extensions, and how long are extensions? Well, candidature and scholarship time are quite different. Candidature time is the period of time that you have where you have funded access to resources and your supervisor. It's the total of 4 FSL, and FSL just means full-time student load, so 4 full-time years or the part-time equivalent. You can have an extension of 1 session under extenuating circumstances without having to pay fees. That's not counted in for part-time, it's just 1 flat session. So if you're approaching a total of 4 FSL, you think you're not going to get your thesis in time, you need to talk to someone about arranging an extension using a variation of program form on our web pages. Any longer than that, you might be charged fees. For scholarships, it's a 3-year maximum with the possibility of a 1-semester extension of your stipend, but you will then after that still have another full-time session available for candidature. If that's totally confusing, please contact me and I'll try and clarify it for you. Submitting the thesis. There's a thesis lodgement form signed by you that this is your work, signed by your supervisor saying that it is ready for examination, and signed by the college. The census dates are important in making a decision about whether someone needs to re-enroll or not, and then the whole fees issue comes up. That's the end of March and the end of August. If you miss that date, you must be enrolled in the next session. That's a federal government rule that we have no control over. I think we've already mentioned how many copies. That was 3 altogether. Hopefully you will only need to send out 2. And of course the final check and signature. No copy stains on anything either, please. In the last months you may have to renegotiate the role with your supervisor. Are you going to be, what sort of arrangements are you going to have for the meetings? What's going to be the role of the panel members? Are they going to be taking on different aspects of the candidature? Very carefully looking at the time and having realistic expectations, being kind to yourself and allowing enough time for each particular stage. So what are the results when your examination finally comes back? The first one is option A, award the degree. This means that the degree is awarded outright. You don't have to do a thing, not even one little tiny editorial change. Option R means some rewriting. That can be a little or a lot. It might be a page of typos and small things that can be addressed with probably in an hour or so. Or it might mean substantial rewriting. Don't differentiate between those two outcomes. Option X is re-examination. If one of the two examiners does not recommend re-examination and says pass the thesis, and re-examination is sought by the university, it won't go back to that first examiner. Re-examination is only by the person who asked for it. And when supervisors and the university is considering examiners' reports, they don't just take an average or say, oh, one said it's okay, so we don't need to take any notice of the other person. They actually look through every particular argument on an academic basis, and just because one examiner doesn't mention something doesn't mean that it can be discounted. So it's a very considered response. Option F, fail, very, very rarely used, seen. I think perhaps I've seen it once or twice asked for in 20 years of my role. So don't be frightened of that one. Actually, your thesis is very unlikely to go out unless it's really ready for examination and you are going to pass. So just let's have a look at the results comparatively over the last few years. You can see that in the last, little less than a decade, we've had a big increase in the number of people who are awarded the degree outright. Of course, just because a person gets an option A doesn't mean that that's a better thesis than the one that had an option R initially or even an option X. It's not a qualitative thing. It's not a graded reflection of the standard of the work. It's just saying whatever is required to bring it up to pass level. But 38% without having to make changes is a good reflection on students and supervisors. The few persisting examinations that require another examination, hanging around about 5%, I think personally I believe reflects poor examiner choice. I can't stress enough the importance of this. And if you're locked in with an examiner who's not the best one, you're stuck then with the result that they give to you. Addressing the reports, initially your supervisor will be asked to do this in confidence without speaking to you initially. To respond to all of the comments in a tabular format is helpful. To give an overall recommendation and have extremely clear instructions if there's an re-examination sought, because the next examination will be conducted exactly on the points raised that were given to you in the rewriting and no other points. If the result's unclear, the university can appoint an additional examiner or an arbiter. That's been used a few times with a good result. They can invite the examiners to confer or ask for further examination, so they're not the preferred options, and I haven't seen either of those options used in the past many years. There's a lot of literature around about examiners, and we'll have some references to that elsewhere in the module, particularly the work of Margaret Kiley and Jerry, I can't think of his name. Jerry Mullins, Opening the Black Box, How Examiners Assess Your Thesis, and a particularly good one. I'm sorry while I'm shuffling here. I just want to make sure that I mention it. It's a PhD, not a Nobel Prize, How Experienced Examiners Assess Research Theses. That's a marvellous little piece of work, and it says that examiners have their own method. They know what a doctorate is, and they don't need us giving them bits of paper with boxes to tick. They understand what it's all about. They're reluctant to fail. They get very angry with universities and supervisors if they think that substandard work is being sent out. They've got their own method, and they often think that sloppy writing is indicative of sloppy thinking, so that, you hear people sometimes say, I don't worry too much about minor editorial changes or fix them up later. Well, they do count. You need to get them right. The other thing that Margaret has written is you don't want a smart aleck selecting examiners to assess doctoral dissertations, and this one explains the importance of that knowledge that your supervisor will have. Oh, this is something that I wanted to end with. This is taken from an examiner report. at UWS, and it's delightful, and you can use this sort of comment in your CV. It would be lovely. I'm quite impressed by every aspect of this work, and I learned a great deal from reading it. And I must congratulate the student. It is without doubt one of the most interesting and provocative PhD theses I've read in 20 years. That's a lovely commendation. I hope that's on your examiner's report. If you have any questions, please send me an email. If I don't know the answer, I'm bound to know who can help you. Bye-bye.